Now to the second part of Kerry O'Brien's interview with Labor's longest-serving Prime Minister Bob Hawke and his biographer and wife Blanche Delpuget. Tonight, an insight into the volatile relationship between Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. What began as a mentoring role developed into a political marriage, which was followed by a bitter divorce. Bob Hawke also discusses current Prime Minister Julia Gillard and the recently unseated Kevin Rudd. And on a personal note, the former leader's notorious philandering while in the Lodge and his love for Blanche Delpuget. Here's the conclusion of Kerry O'Brien's interview.
Blanche Delpuget, Bob Hawke, welcome back to the program. The leadership frictions with Paul Keating. Blanche, you've essentially described the initial relationship with these two men as mentor and student to some degree. But one where the student always had his own plans to be king one day.
Yes.
Plans that he'd had to surrender to Bob Hawke. In a nutshell, how would you summarise the way these two men dealt with that essential tension?
Well, it was a very creative tension for years. It really worked extremely well for the government and for the nation. But then I think it just became too much for Paul's nerves. He too was highly strung, and too much for Bob's nerves. So you had the problem of two bulls in one paddock.
How elegantly put.
Well, I wish it were more elegant.
But Bob, did you at any stage? I mean, you've been a political animal for so many years. Did you endeavour to see it from his side as well? That
Sure.
That here he was, a crucial and very creative part of a very successful government. That at some stage he would have felt some entitlement before it was too late and before he was going to get the short end of the ride. I mean, how did you factor that into the equation?
I took it into account, and he said he had a legitimate ambition. He'd been in Parliament very, very, very much longer than I had been. And while he had a tentative start as Prime Minister, we all had to hold his hand. He was a quick learner and became, as we all know, a very efficient, competent treasurer and certainly parliamentary performer. All those facts were in my mind, and I gave them proper weight. The problem became in the latter stages when the excesses of, in my judgment, of his public observations, or observations that became public, like the Placido Domingo speech, conveyed what I thought were weaknesses which more than offset those very significant positives that we have both referred to.
But of course, very hard to see beyond your own subjective view in the situation you were in. How were you ever going to identify what was the right time for you to go of your own accord?
The correct answer to that question, I think, is that you can never be sure, I think absolutely sure, that this is the right time.
Blanche records that 12 out of 16 ministers tried to persuade you to resign. Gareth Evans said, quote, "Pull out, digger, the dogs are pissing on your swag." Did you come close to stepping down? How much were you influenced by personal pride? Did you not know how?
No, I didn't come close to stepping down at all. I was convinced that on two fronts. One, that I was the best equipped and most able to get Labor up the next time. I genuinely and unequivocally believed that. And I had and I don't want to be hurtful to Paul, it's in the book, but some of the things he'd said about Australia and what his intentions were, and his disinclination for long hours of work. These things had turned me away from the thought that, at least at that time, that he could do the job.
And, Kerry, if I may jump in, it's the nature of genuine political leaders that they won't surrender. They are born to fight, and they will fight on until their legs and arms are cut off.
The Black Knight. The Black Knight in Monty Python, the Holy Grail.
Yes, that's right. But it's the truth.
Have you ever made him watch that?
I've made him watch some other Monty Python. But that is the truth of political leaders. They are very strange creatures.
Thank you, darling.
They're rare, they're important, but they're not like, dare I say it, you and me, Kerry.
You wrote about what it was like for Bob after those years in power, surrounded by staff, constantly the centre of attention, endlessly grappling with the affairs of state and of the world, to suddenly have it stripped away. How do you think that affected him?
He was terribly discombobulated at first. I have to say, nervous. When you're used to being surrounded by, guys with guns, and suddenly you're walking around and they're not there, and there is no retinue and whatnot. That's sort of disconcerting, and he'd lost the great love of his life in the terms of a job. He felt bruised and battered and dead, really. And as I've said in the book, from the grave, he had to moulder for some time in the grave of his ambition.
And how do you feel now? What are you thinking as you hear Blanche?
I can identify with a lot of what she's saying. It was a big change where you're going from having your own private plane and so on and being looked after in every way to having to do these sorts of things, public transport, and that has a physical impact for a while. I think it didn't take me an enormously long period to become accustomed to the new life. Of course, before long, the question of what was going to happen with us, that took up a lot of my emotional thinking and time as well. And
This is you and Hazel and Blanche.
And Blanche, yes. Because I started to get involved in a number of things in a business way and so on, which and in the charitable fields, which took up my time. So Blanche is right. I had to fashion a new life and a different life, but I came to enjoy it enormously.
So that period, I mean, you two had been together, or you'd certainly had a relationship before you became Prime Minister. And Blanche, you've written that Bob and Hazel's marriage actually settled down in that time in the lodge, and again,
yes,
there'd been problems, there'd been tensions, but that it kind of worked. It worked well in that time. Bob, was Blanche still in your thoughts through that period? It was obviously one assumes it was a very intense relationship the first time as well as the second.
Yes, very much. There was a sense in which you had to almost concentrate, try and put a wall there, because if you're going to be concentrating on what you're doing. But yeah, she was very, very much in my thoughts, and as the book indicates, more than in my thoughts.
Well, in fact, Blanche is quite open about your philandering over the course of a lifetime, which she says became cramped